Part 1. Newt was not a little man. He was thick, hairy, and hulking, and after an astonishing experiment at 7, which had left him confused for almost 8 months before he tried it again, by the age of 11, he was jerking off between 3 and 5 times a day. 34 years later, Newt, in New York City for almost 7 months, had been riding the subway end to end for 3 of them, during which time he had not had a shower and, for 2 weeks, had had no shoes. Most of the day he'd been sleeping till he got hungry. Then he'd come out and try to panhandle up some food. But that was a few hours off, and he'd managed to find somewhere to beat his meat between 5 and 8 times a day. He'd done it between the cars. About an hour ago, it had run down the far side of the door, and he'd returned to sit down to drift off again almost immediately. When he blinked, a dark-haired kid, 17, 18, was sitting across the car from him beside a backpack. Newt opened his eyes a crack, saw the kid was bending forward, and, unlacing first his left sneaker, then his right, fingered them free of his feet, sat up with both of them hooked to one hand, and shoveled them into the backpack. Barefoot, the kid stood up, unbuckled a wide leather belt, thumbed apart the button, unzipped his fly, and dropped his pants. From the rivets and the change pocket, Newt realized they were black jeans. His own were a pair of green work pants with some white and orange paint stains he'd found in a trash receptacle, which someone had left and gratefully he had taken. Awkwardly, stepped out of them, pushed down a black pair of briefs with Fellini in broad white letters, slipped them down over his knees, and hopping on one foot, then the other, got out of those as well. The briefs went back on the knapsack, the jeans were pulled up and buckled. He sat once more and shoved his briefs into the sack after his shoes. Newt glanced to the rear, then the far end of the subway car. They were the only two on it. The kid had not been circumcised, and Newt felt himself shifting inside his own pants. Was this going to be some sort of sex dream of the kind that had occasionally bewildered him during his 124 weeks in Leavenworth, out in Kansas? That was almost 15 years ago. Since then, he had managed to get to Miami's Biscayne Avenue and 3 other cities, all of which had markets streets, and one of which was San Francisco, one of which was Philadelphia, before he'd ended up in New York. He moved 1 foot an inch over on the gritty subway flooring. A couple of shadows from the beams outside the elevated train streaked through the car. No, this wasn't a dream. At least he was pretty sure it wasn't. He closed his eyes, then slitted them enough to look around the car once more. The train was coming to a stop. The doors to the left of the kid opened, and nobody got on. Newt opened his eyes and glanced down at his stained pants. It wasn't all just paint. There was a lot of dried semen left over from a project he thought about perhaps a month ago, when it had occurred to him that might be a way to get somebody's attention. Till finally he decided he was probably just too old and not the sort that anybody was really going to go after the way sometimes it had happened in jail, or, since then, a few times when he'd been managing to get between here and there, wherever there happened to be. Newt lifted his big hand to his mouth and began to gnaw on his thumbnail. The boy was blinking, staring, which is when it hit Newt that, in getting rid of his shoes and underpants, the kid had not zipped up his fly, the kid was imitating him. Newt was confused, but not stupid. He had been a bum long enough to learn that some guys, like to blow him, which, if they had some dirty pictures or something, he could get into. But the habit of owning nothing had eclipsed any habits of buying himself extras of any sort, especially disposable ones that were so ephemeral and expensive. He opened his eyes and frowned. Across from him, the kid swallowed. Without moving, Newt said over the mechanical thunder that started up again with the train, "You want something?" The kid blinked, shrugged, looked sheepish. Newt smiled. "Come on over here, if you want." Without even looking, the kid grabbed his knapsack and was across the aisle between them to sit beside Newt, who was still gnawing. Newt looked toward the far door between the cars again and put his arm around the kid's shoulder. He squeezed in what he hoped was a friendly way, though he was somewhat frightened. He was not sure of what. He'd done enough weird things in his life, but he also felt too tired and disoriented to get kicked off a train right then. So far, though, there'd been no sign of a conductor to put them out. He frowned back at the kid beside him, who was not looking at his face. Of course, he was staring down at Newt's half-gaping fly. "Hey, what, you like me or something?" The kid said loudly, but with no inflection, "Yeah." "You want to suck my dick or something?" Still without looking up, the kid nodded. Looking down, Newt realized the kid was grinning, or was he about to cry? "Yeah." The kid's face came up. It was a grin in his face, somewhat unshaven, which made Newt wonder if he wasn't older than Newt had first thought. "I wish you had some pictures or something." Immediately the kid pulled his sack into his lap and went in with one hand and tugged out 2 magazines with colorful photographic covers. "I'll be honest," Newt chuckled, I prefer the ones with the women." On the cover of the top one was a curvaceous, large-breasted, and wholly uninteresting blonde. Again Newt frowned. I guess, darker ones." He shrugged. Newt pulled the magazine behind the first. The kid pulled the magazine behind the first out and put it on top. "Like this?" With a falling inflection, Newt said, "You got everything, don't you?" Then he frowned and started gnawing again. The women pictured were not only black, he realized, but she-males. During that nebulous time of experimentation, right after release from his second and last term in prison, he'd had intimate friendships with Elise, 4 years his senior, and Ginger. But even though until a few years ago he'd still sent Ginger the occasional postcard, the only person he ever sent postcards to, he hadn't had actual sex with either. He hadn't had sex with anyone, really, except guys. He just wasn't used to them being younger than he was. That was really confusing. The kid put the 2 magazines back and pulled out a third. Dark Surprise. Newt felt the kid's foot up against his own and lifted his enough for the kids to slide under and push his own down. That seemed to have settled something, though he was not exactly sure what. "Does that feel good?" The kid said, "We can do it here if you want. I don't think nothing's going to happen, but we should really get off and go into the John if you want to get serious." He did not pull his foot from under Newt's. Newt took the magazine with his free hand and looked at it without settling it into his lap. The kid let the knapsack fall over onto the seat, and his other hand was underneath it, slipping into Newt's zipperless fly, where beneath the kid's fingers Newt felt himself stiffening. "I'm kind of dirty." "Yeah," the kid told him. "Well, We all have to eat our peck of dirt before we die. And I know your dick's going to be salty. Besides, we each got that bag of hydrochloric acid that washes and disinfects pretty much everything that goes through it. First big stop on the immune system. Newt laughed. Where'd you learn that shit? High school, the kid said. It's called your stomach. You can see it on the charts in the doctor's office hanging out around the walls. Newt said, I ain't been to a doctor's office in a long, long time, and I only been in high school for a couple of months. We didn't learn nothing. He rubbed at his groin. Hey, if that's what you're looking for, man, I'll suck you off right now, but next stop's Fordham. There's a good movie house right down the block from the station. We could go in there, and nobody'd care if we fooled around. 2. By the time we'd left the movie, I knew Newt didn't know how to read. He wanted me to read the words at the head of the movie and was surprised to learn it was the title and the name of the stars, the producer and the director. He said he'd always wondered how people found out the names of movies and TV shows and things like that. As soon as he got in, Newt unbuttoned his workman's greens and pulled out his cock. Can I do you like my daddy used to done me? Probably, I told him. Get on down and nose my fucking toes, scumbag, and I'm going to piss on you. He didn't, but that was the beginning of a fun afternoon, which ended up with him on the floor and me on top of him. By that time, both of us were out of our clothes. I think I had a sock on still. He was 2 loads lighter, and I'd come against his belly. He no longer had to take a leak, or had done it and gone into the commode, nor had it gone into the commode either. Bitter and salty, I could still taste it. We were both on the rug, and I had my hand on the side of his knee, where, with the hairs there, the skin was almost prickly under my fingers. He closed his eyes, and thinking he may have gone to sleep, I watched him breathe and thought about air branching down and thought about the air branching down into his lungs, through the tree of air tubes, down into the smaller and smaller tubes till it reached the alveoli, where, through the membrane wall, oxygen moved into the blood to be carried, by the blood on the other side, throughout the rest of his thick body, the lymph system and the neuronal tree up to the brain, like trees within trees, entwined with trees. His gray-brown eyes opened again. Man, on the subway, when we first went into that theater, whatever the fuck its name was, the Fordham, I never figured you had your own place. I lived with my dad right up to that time the police came and dragged me off to Leavenworth. I know that's in Kansas, but I still don't know what state we was in before that. And I ain't never had my own place in my life. It took me 2 weeks of him coming by my place every day to bring me half the money he'd made panhandling to learn not only that, while he could copy down someone's address, he didn't really read. He didn't know what state his father had raised him in or what his last name was, and that he'd learned how to jerk off by sitting on his father's lap in their cabin while the old man brought himself to orgasm. But no, he wasn't particularly eager to find out where he was or if he was alive. He'd eaten better since he'd left, but hadn't learned much of anything at all. I also knew his jail nickname had been Newt the Brute, which was the biggest joke I think I ever heard. But in jail, they hadn't thought so. I grinned and got down on my knees and lay down on top of him. I got my dick out my fly and onto his that was still broken, and into his that was still broken, and began rubbing. That man was always hard and ready to have me rub off on him. He wrapped both arms around me, then released one, brought his hand up to his mouth, and began to gnaw on his nails. Hey, what are you? I moved up a little closer. What do you think I am? Well, Newt looked embarrassed. When I first seen you, I thought you could be Puerto Rican. Maybe a crazy black guy. I chuckled. You got it. Nigger cocksucker, actually. Well, yeah, you sure do that good. I figured I didn't need to tell him about the genius IQ or the scholarship I turned down. Besides, I'd never been able to spell for shit anyway. On my decision at 19 that I didn't want to be rich, I just wanted a big, grubby, hairy guy, 5 or 15 years older than me, who'd like to get his dick sucked and let me dog off on his hemp-hairy leg, and who liked to talk dirty, and by now I knew I was closer to that than I'd ever been before. After a moment, he told me, I really dig that shit where you rub your dick alongside mine, but on me, the left side is the business one. He took his hand down from his mouth and pushed it between us, got mine over on the other side of his. What about you? I came all over his hand. Whoa, he said. I managed to get in a breath. I think both sides of mine are about the same. He pulled thick, semen-covered fingers out from between us, and we ate the stuff off his hand. At least I think so. Then we held on to each other, and both of us shot again. It was 2 weeks before he told me, first, that I liked to do him the way his daddy used to do him when he was my age, and second, that he'd never known the name of any of the states they used to live in until after he'd been on his own, hitching around for half a year, and people began to tell him about the geography. 3, which goes back in time to where we were in 1. Newt opened the magazine at random, and wouldn't you know, there was a nude picture of a black woman who actually looked like Elise a little, but after a roll and tuck job. They actually do stuff in movie houses up here. Somebody said something about that to me when I was hitching in, but I thought they were kidding. Other than the Fordham up here in the Bronx, just some of the places down on 8th Avenue, somebody told me there was 2 out in Brooklyn I've never visited. This Turkish exhibitionist brought me up here once, and it was actually pretty kicky. I've been here 3 or 4 times, but nothing bad ever happened. It's not as hot as the 8th Avenue ones, but it's better than nothing. You mean like a peep show? No, it's a movie. You don't have to stick your dick through no glory hole, except in the basement john between the stall, if that's what turns you on. No kidding. Newt was surprised. With 3/4 of a year in New York, he hadn't been to any movies at all yet. Well, I don't got no money. If you want to fuck around for an afternoon, I'll pay us for going in, get us a couple of sandwiches or some sodas or beer, if that's what you want. Soda, beer's too expensive. Hey, I ain't been to a movie since... Had he been in a movie since there'd been those movie nights back in jail on Fridays, back in Leavenworth? It's the Fordham. There's a deli at the end of the block. Nobody's gonna mind if we do shit? It's dark in there, the kid said. Besides, that's what everybody's doing in it. Newt found himself intrigued. Well, okay. It sounded like something he wanted to see. The train was slowing. The kid stood and hooked his knapsack by one strap. They pulled into the station, stopped, and the door pulled back. When you had doors like that in a house, Newt thought, they called them pocket doors, but in a subway, they were just sliding doors. He followed the kid out to the platform. You in school someplace? Nah, the kid said, I got a job down on 47th Street. Since there was no one around, they pushed out the swinging gates beside the stile and past the change booth, then started out and down the steps. Newt reached into his broken fly and tugged out his cock. I'm glad you like this thing so much. Yeah, the kid said. Are you an exhibitionist? The Turkish guy who first brought me up here after I met him in one of the places downtown hangs out in the Fordham. He likes to wave his meat around like that. He says it gives him a hard-on. What kind of sandwich you want? The pastrami's pretty good. There are not a lot of people out on the street up here, but you should probably put your pen in your pocket till we get inside. Huh? What? Oh. He put himself away as best he could. I want to get a chance to suck on it, and I don't want you to get in no trouble before we get in. Hey, you're a good guy. The kid laughed. No, I'm just fucking horny. Hey, how do you get off? If we can sit in the front, I can hump your leg like a dog. You can stick your fingers in my mouth or something, and I'll shoot. Newt chuckled. My dog used to do that when I was a kid at home. I could even get off on that. I wonder if I could still get off that way with you. The kid said, hey, as long as you give me something to suck on, like, your fingers. Newt laughed, raised his thick hand to his mouth. My fingers? He looked at his hand down and looked at it, then began to gnaw again. Yeah, I bite my nails all this shit. My dad and my teachers used to tell me forever I gotta stop that. The kid said, probably if you had, I wouldn't have sat down across from you. Shit, Newt said, again, surprised. Come on, the kid said, put your dick away. Oh, yeah. Newt slid his cock back within his broken fly, 3 more steps, and they walked onto the pavement, warm in the sunlight. Again, surprisingly, the kid put his foot down on top of Newt's. Newt looked up at him, stopping. You walk around the city barefoot and everybody thinks you're crazy. It's a good way to get left alone. Yeah? Again, Newt chuckled. Well, maybe whoever told you that was right. Hey, I hope you got another subway token so when we finish I can get back on the subway. Don't worry, the kid said. I got you taken care of. Well, show me this theater. Without saying anything, the kid started walking again. On the corner was a great tree, too thick to get your arms more than 2/3 around, which he never passed without thinking of the xylem flowing up from its root hairs to its myriad leaves, bringing water and nutrients from the earth to the end of its twigs, and of the phloem flowing down just below the bark, returning its inevitable waste from its growth process back to the ground, and the leaf system become a whispering heart with each breeze shushing through it, though he did not say anything. At the street's end, a sign, Fordham, hung down the upper stories of the building to the top of the marquee. Underneath they could see the bulbs that were on even in the warm July morning. Thank you. Woo!
Thank you all for coming. In January, we're going to have Rue Perot and June Geringer read.